So I've seen 4 real estate market crashes up close and a couple of others before I was even really paying attention. And I think that big problems with a lot of gurus that are teaching right now is that they are not teaching for people to read history. What happened in the past, where things might go based on what has happened in the past. That provides a big challenge for a new investor and also a very experienced investor. I hear all of these stories about people getting into multifamily investing over the last 5, 6, 7 years because they've gone to some courses and they've built these massive portfolios, which is amazing to do. You know, I've heard about this one guy who built a $20 million portfolio in 6 years. It's not necessarily hard to do, but the chances are pretty high right now that he's gonna lose a lot of it because the debt that he got 4 years ago, 5 years ago is starting to recast, and those interest rates are going to go higher. What precipitated that? Well, the Federal Reserve Bank said, we need to curb inflation, and so we're gonna start raising the interest rates. And because the federal rate started rising, mortgage prices started rising as well. And that creates the problem we find ourselves in. And if people had learned what happened in 1987, when the Reagan administration decided that they wanted to change some tax laws and they got it passed, one day you didn't have to pay capital gain tax, and the next day you did, even unrealized capital gains, you would know that the government and the Fed can change the rules at any moment, and it could become crippling for your real estate portfolio. But a lot of these guys that have been investing for 6 or 7 or 10 years have never gone through a market crash, and they don't necessarily pay attention to what happened in the past as far as how to protect yourselves for the future. And I think that this is a really important thing as we're about to go into what I think our next downward part of the market cycle is going to be. We're going to go into a lot of foreclosures on the multifamily space. We're certainly seeing some foreclosures in the office and retail space. And I think it's going to trickle down into a little bit of some of the depressed housing markets, because while we have a need for, I think the statistic was 6 million homes, that's a broad spectrum across the United States. You know, a small town that has 40,000 people, there's not a lot of influx of new people coming into those areas. So those property values are gonna drop as well. We're gonna have some job loss. We're entering into an election cycle now, and we're a year away from the presidential election. And there's gonna be a lot of uncertainty about who's going to win the presidency and how that's going to impact positively or negatively markets, both stock market, commodities market, and real estate market. And I think that anybody that's paying attention now can learn lessons from the past. And I think it's imperative that we go back and do our diligence, if we can, and see what happened back in 1987 when they changed these laws, how people were affected, and then how can they move forward starting today. What can they do to plan? And I've got a couple of ideas. One, you probably need to restructure your debt. If you have a syndication on a multifamily, let's say 4 years ago or 3 years ago, you bought a multifamily apartment complex in Houston, Texas, or Dallas, Texas, or any tertiary or secondary size city, and you're about to get your interest rate recast into a higher interest rate, then you need to start having the hard conversations with your investors today, saying, look, our cash flow is not going to be what we projected. And here are the reasons why. Our interest rates are going higher. The inflation is still higher. So if any units we need to rehab are costing more money to rehab than we could budget for back then. And it just, people are moving out because they're going to be losing jobs. So we need to have the tough conversation today and say, look, we may need to do a capital call because that's in our syndication agreement. That's in our PPM. We may need to do a capital call. And if you don't want to pay the capital call, here is what happens to your interests in this LP, this limited partnership. So these limited partnerships are really going to start taking on some additional capital requirements. And if you're in a limited partnership right now and you're waiting to hear back from your general partner and you're not hearing anything, I would start reaching out to them every month until they start giving you a plan of attack for the next 18 to 24 months, or maybe even 36 months. Because I think that we're gonna have some challenges within the lending industry where people are gonna let their properties go. And if a GP decides to just let that property go to foreclosure, you should know well in advance what you can do if you can even recover any of your capital out of that investment. I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to help you get prepared on what's about to happen, because we've already seen it. And there's already lists that I get, email lists every week. These are the newest 20 apartment complexes or the newest 20 self-storage complexes that are in foreclosure. And so as a limited partner or as a general partner, you need to start planning. What are you gonna do if additional capital is required? What are you gonna need to do if your interest rate goes from 3.5 to 8? Or maybe higher because maybe your debt service coverage ratio isn't the right one. It's not meeting the bank regulated requirements. Your income isn't being met in that complex. You've got to start having these tough conversations, because as a general partner, you need to have these conversations and hold your limited partner's hands throughout this next 24 months. You've got to hold them by the hand and you've got to say, look, I know it's going to be scary. I know it's going to be uncertain. We're going to do everything we can. And I'm going to have monthly updates on where we are and what we're doing to generate new revenue, what we're doing to keep our units full, even if we're needing to start to lower our prices per unit so that we can keep the occupancy higher. That's a really, really tough conversation to have, because everybody got into that multifamily syndication 3 years ago with delusions of grandeur. Hey, we're gonna 2x our money in 48 months or 72 months. And that may happen, but likely right now, it's not in the cards. Unless, of course, they bought at such a steep discount that they've already built up enough of a nest egg, enough dry powder, that they have enough liquidity on hand that they can ride out the next 2 years of these inflated mortgage costs. So that's just some of the things that I would really pay attention to. Take the time, call your general partner. You have every right to do it, even if you've only invested $10,000. If you've invested $100,000 or $200,000, you absolutely should call them today and say, what is our plan? So that you're not being left in the dark. I have a business partner who had a friend who invested in another guru's syndication, apartment guru's syndication. And it's interesting because some of these things are starting to bubble up, and some of this news of the recasting of these loans, the new interest rates, they are really having an effect on this general partner not returning phone calls. She's burying her head in the sand, and that's the worst thing you can do. So when you refuse to return your limited partner's calls, you look like a schmuck. You look like you're a thief. You look like you don't know what you're doing. And you may not know what you're doing, but if you can at least communicate to them and say, look, here's what we're going to be doing, here's what we are doing, and even if those aren't all of the things that you're trying to do or can do, at least you're communicating with them. It's tough, it's not fun, but it's an important part of being a general partner. So don't bury your head in the sand if you're a general partner. And I know many of the gurus there are not teaching people how to have hard conversations. And I think it's a really important tool for you to put into action right now. So communicate with your limited partners. If you're a limited partner, communicate with your general partners and understand what their plan of attack is. For those of you that are really super liquid right now, I think you also have an opportunity to wait it out a little bit until you can start buying some of those multifamily projects that are about to go to foreclosure. What an opportunity. I always ask my favorite question, what's great about this? Well, what's great is if you've got $1 million or $2 or $3 million sitting in the sidelines, you're going to be able to start buying a few of these properties over the next 12 to 18 to 24 months, because maybe somebody is a general partner and they need an exit strategy. And maybe, just maybe, you have the liquidity to come in and buy that out, or do a cash infusion and get a majority of that equity back down the road. So I think that there are some ways that people can really, some clarity on where they are in their actual syndication today, but also if you have some liquidity right now or over the course of the next few months, maybe you sell some properties and you can do some 1031s, maybe there's an opportunity there. But I think that finding out what opportunities you have, you're going to be able to look back into the past and find out, how did some of those people, those investors in 1987, how did they deal with it? Did they lose everything like my father did? Or did they restructure some things so that they could survive and fight another day? For my father, he learned about trusts, and he learned how to sell a property with a promissory note in a trust so that he never actually had to give the title to them with a first mortgage, so he never actually had a capital gain. It's a whole thing that I've been using for the better part of a decade now, how to hold debt in a trust on a single family home or multiplex home, and so that you can not have to worry about any capital gain issues until you actually have a capital gain, and then you can do a 1031. But there's a lot of different ways to protect yourself by paying attention to the past, having the communication, and having some liquidity events so that you can reposition that capital coming up here in the future. So if this was helpful, please drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Let me know what you're planning to do if and when you are a limited partner and you need to have that communication. Let me know how that works out for you. If you have some capital, let me know what you're going to do with it in the next 12 to 18 months.